We begin today by traveling across the ocean and through time to 17th century England. We take a look at a stern-looking guy in a serious need of some sideburn intervention. We listen to his thoughts on the secret to happiness. We ultimately seek wisdom from sources as varied as an African-American spiritual and the movie The Princess Bride, all on the way to answering the question, what is plantation theology?
Welcome to the Sky Pilot podcast that explores questions of faith, spirituality, and religion. I'm Dan Matthews, and I don't have all the answers, but I do enjoy the questions. Welcome to the podcast where every question is an invitation into a spiritual quest, and you're invited along for the journey.
So I'm surfing the web and checking my social media, and I stumble across a quote accompanied by a black and white photograph of a fellow named J.C. Ryle. Now, I have no idea who this guy is prior to seeing this photograph, except that he has that stern look accompanied by some seriously overgrown sideburns that make him appear to be, well, let's just say less than a warm character. Here's his picture. Okay, that's not fair. Let me show you one that captures his more playful side. Actually, I can totally relate. Whatever it is he's feeling, whatever sentiment he has in that second picture, I think I've felt that before. That ought to be a meme somewhere, don't you think? Anyway, the quote from him is this, and this is what he has to say. I'll read it to you. Nothing can hurt God's people except and until God permits. We are all immortal until our work is done. To realize that nothing happens in the world except by the eternal counsels of our Father and according to His eternal plans is one grand secret of living a calm, peaceful, and contented life. Now, before getting into our discussion, let me tell you a little bit about Mr. J.C. Ryle from the research that I did. He was born into an affluent home in England in 1816. His father was a private banker. J.C. went to school, public school, which, again, for those of us who are Americans and in other parts of the world, public school in England is what we call private school in the United States. This public school is called Eton. In case that doesn't immediately ring a bell for you, this is arguably the most elite and exclusive private school, at least in the English-speaking world. How elite, you might ask? Well, they produced the likes of Ian Fleming, George Orwell, David Cameron, and Boris Johnson. And there were two others I wanted to mention. Who were those other two? Prince Harry and Prince William both went there as well. Need I say more? After Eton, he attended Oxford, which itself has to be in the top 2 or 3 most prestigious universities in the world, and he graduated and intended to stand for election to Parliament, but due to some unforeseen circumstances, had to change plans and instead became a priest in the Anglican Church, or the Church of England, and he later eventually became a bishop in the Church of England. Look, I want to be clear, this is not Pick on the Dead Guy themed podcast. Although now that I say that, I'm pretty sure that a podcast entitled Pick on the Dead Guy would be an absolute runaway hit. Oh well. Evidently, this J.C. Ryle chap was a surprisingly nice bloke. Hey, did you notice I just used the words chap and bloke in the same sentence? It's almost like instantly being transported directly onto the set of Mary Poppins, isn't it? Anyway, he was a nice guy, or so they say, and I believe them, whoever they are. I would argue that the nature of his personal theology that we see in our quote for today is more of an expression of his own socioeconomic upbringing than it is a reflection of the true nature of God. Now, having said that, you might ask, is there something inherently wrong with this statement of faith? Is it such a deviation from mainline Christian belief that it stands as being clearly heretical? Well, no. When you put it that way, it's pretty mainstream for a lot of Christians. But I would still argue that it is the theology of privilege. Of course, J.C. Ryle likes to think that everything that happens in this world is according to God's plan. J.C. Ryle lived a good life. a really good life. He was riding high. Surely his life is exactly all of what God intended. Theology is often a reflection of our place and experience as much, well, if not more, than an accurate reflection of our studying Scripture and seeking the true nature of God. Since our quote comes from a man born in 1816, let's look at what was happening in the world at that time. Do you remember what was still legal in England at that time? In its colonies at that time, and of course in the United States at that time? Slavery. So let's travel across the pond, as they say, and look at the pre-Civil War American South in order to see an interesting reflection of the world at that time, but also, and perhaps more important, to learn something about ourselves today in the process. In America, Southern plantation owners who oversaw the institution of slavery saw no conflict between their faith and their ownership of fellow creatures of God. Quite to the contrary, disturbingly, they saw the two as wholly compatible, one even justifying the other. So much so that many of them taught their own faith, Christianity, to the slaves so that the slaves would come to understand that God willed this human-wrought horror to exist. Yeah, there's not going to be any pretending to be objective here. Slavery was horrible and a totally evil creation of humanity, and also God had nothing to do with it. That's all on us. The point here is fairly simple. Generally, people who tell me that everything is God's plan are speaking from a place of having received what they need in life and are thankful that God has created, well, such a good plan. I have never sat with a mother who just discovered that her child has a horrible and incurable illness and heard her say, "You know, Dan, I find strength and hope in knowing that my child's suffering in this moment is all part of God's master plan." No, I have never heard that. Matter of fact, that mother often draws strength from the notion that God is with her in her pain, in her child's pain. She and her child are not alone. No matter what happens in this life, they will have a joyous, untroubled existence reunited together again in the life to come. Of course, that is, she thinks that sometime after she asks, why the hell did God let this happen to my child? Yeah, it's a multi-step process to get there for obvious reasons. Wait, Dan, I can hear people asking, wait, perhaps the slaves believe the same thing as the plantation owners did. You don't know. You don't know because you can't ask them. Well, actually, we can. There are a lot of old African-American spirituals from this time and around it, and they give a pretty piercing insight into their theology. For example, let's look at the words of the spiritual "We'll understand it better by and by." The chorus repeated throughout this song says, "By and by, when the morning comes, all the saints of God are gathered home. We'll tell the story of how we've overcome, and we'll understand it better by and by." Notice there isn't a belief here that this is all God's plan, that our suffering is God's plan. I have sung this song many times with the members of the bluegrass band that I used to be a part of. And it's funny because the song has a pretty happy, upbeat melody. And the melody can mislead you as to what the song's really about. Now, this verse, to me, is the words of someone who is saying, this is some pretty messed up stuff we're experiencing. And when we enter the afterlife, we're going to have some serious questions to ask. Look, I get it. Plantation theology is the tendency to believe that when riding high and our life is at the top of the world, God must have intended it to be that way. I can't tell you how often in my ministry someone in the congregation is diagnosed with lung cancer. And then almost every single person who hears the news asks this question. Did Susan or Tyrone or Pierre or John or Sasha or whoever has been diagnosed, did that person smoke? The question should never be asked, but it always is, because our fear overwhelms our better sense in that moment. What we're really asking is, please tell me that this suffering makes sense, that this suffering is justified, and that my not suffering, well, that's part of the intended plan as well. And that God intends me to continue to go on not suffering. That's part of plantation theology. And I believe we all have a bit of it. It's our need to believe that we are somehow chosen, and by consequence, often unspoken, but by consequence, others are not. I need my blessings to have meaning. I need my blessings to be intended, and again, by consequence, the struggles of other people, well, we don't want to say it, but those need to be intended as well, because it makes the universe feel like there's some order to it. There's some purpose to it. Look, are there people still who believe as J.C. Riley did? You betcha. There are lots of them. I just wish we could all come to grips with a couple of things as we work through our own personal understanding of who God is and our own personal theologies. So here are a couple of simple things. One, regardless of what your theology is, if you believe in God, then your attempts to work out what that means will always lead to some difficulties, some paradoxes. The very things from which you draw comfort may be the very same theology that causes pain for someone else in their struggles of life. Also, never tell someone why your theology makes their pain or their struggle less painful or less of a struggle. Look, anytime someone offers you a theology such as J.C. Ryle that ends with this promise, this is, and these are his words, this is, quote, the key to a calm, peaceful, and contented life, quote. Anytime someone offers you that sort of theology, walk away. Just walk away. The life of a follower of God is going to have some hardship. And to quote Princess Bride,
anyone who says differently is selling something.
I love that movie. The life of a believer is going to be a struggle. It's going to have struggle. Shoot, the life of someone who doesn't follow God is hard at times. It's hard for all of us. And except for perhaps an incalculably small number of people who, I don't know, just through statistic probability have lived life without any real hardship, for all of the rest of us, life has some hardships. And anyone who tries to convince you that their faith is the secret to life without pain, without struggle, or without hardship is not telling you the truth. Or worse, trying to keep you contented with something that you really should not be contented with. That's all for today. And before you go looking for it, the term plantation theology is my own. If you find it a little troublesome, even a little offensive, yeah, that was the point. It was intended to make us a little uncomfortable. Oh, and if you listened to all of this and thought, yeah, Dan, tell them. You know that feeling that I wasn't talking to you? That the real problems reside elsewhere? That's plantation theology too. I encourage you to reach out and let me know what you think. If you're watching this on YouTube, then leave a comment below. Or if you're listening through my podcast, then send me an email. As always, I love to hear from you. My email address is dan@skypilot.zone. And on your spiritual journey, may you ask questions, seek answers, and boldly go wherever the quest takes you.
Thanks for joining us here today and being part of the SkyPilot Faith Quest community. This is a great place to ask questions you wouldn't feel comfortable or safe asking in other places. And remember, the sign of a strong faith, solid religion, or healthy spiritual journey is not certainty, but that you keep asking questions.